Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, perhaps the most beautiful historic town in all of America. But in 1859, this was the location where a man set in action his own plan to free the slaves throughout the country. My name is Dr. Rick Gardner from Columbus State University. This is another Muskogee County School District podcast. The story of John Brown and Harper's Ferry. You may remember seeing in a previous Muskogee County School District podcast that in 1820, the United States government agreed not to allow slavery to exist in any new state north of the southern border of Missouri. This rule was known as the Missouri Compromise. Now, in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act changed that rule. Instead, the government decided that it should be up to those who settle in that part of the United States to determine whether slavery should exist there. The rule was called popular sovereignty. Let's let the people decide. Well, needless to say, this change made those people who hated slavery very mad. Those people were known as abolitionists, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act was a tremendous disappointment to them. One of the strongest abolitionists alive at the time was a man from New York named John Brown. After the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, John Brown determined that he and his sons would have to go to Kansas as settlers and make their voice known. But they were going to do more than just vote. They went to Kansas with guns, and they were determined to do their best to keep out those who believe in slavery. The Browns used violence in their attempt to dissuade pro-slavery settlers from entering Kansas. Well, in 1857, the Supreme Court of the United States handed down a decision regarding the status of black people in the nation. In the case of Dred Scott versus Sanford, Chief Justice Roger Taney said that blacks were not citizens and have no constitutional rights. There is, by the way, another Muskogee County School District podcast dedicated entirely to the Dred Scott decision. While in Kansas, John Brown read the Dred Scott decision. Needless to say, the decision made him furious. As a result of the Dred Scott decision, Brown determined that the United States government could not be trusted. Therefore, in 1858, John Brown said that the United States government was null and void, and he and his followers formed a new provisional government of the United States. Of course, John Brown's followers declared him the commander-in-chief of the new provisional United States government. Since the U.S. government could not be trusted to do the right thing and give slaves their freedom, Brown had decided that he would do it himself. John Brown devised a plan for freeing all the slaves. First, he needed weapons, and the little town in Virginia known as Harper's Ferry was the location of a United States arsenal, a place where weapons were stored. Brown determined to invade Harper's Ferry and raid the arsenal. Then he would begin to distribute the weapons to the slaves, gradually building a massive slave army by means of what might be called the snowball effect. Brown would move from town to town in the South, distributing weapons as he went and adding more and more slaves to his large army of freed slaves. One of Brown's advisors was Harriet Tubman. Brown conferred upon Miss Tubman the rank of general. She had intended to participate in Brown's war, but apparently an illness prevented her from doing so. Well, on October 16, 1859, Brown put his plan into action. He and his band of followers crossed the Potomac River from Maryland into Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and seized control of the federal arsenal there at Harper's Ferry. There were several deaths in the process, including that of an African American who ironically stood in the way of Brown's raid. But from there, it sure didn't go as John Brown had planned. Brown had hoped to take the thousands of muskets from the arsenal and begin to distribute them to the slaves in Virginia. However, within 24 hours, the locals rallied to trap John Brown in a brick engine house with all of his followers. This building was later known as John Brown's Fort. The following day, the United States Marines, under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee, showed up at Harper's Ferry to capture John Brown. As the Marines entered the engine house, several fell as casualties. 2 of John Brown's own sons were killed, but Brown himself was knocked out and captured. That's the way that the raid on Harper's Ferry came to an end. But the story doesn't quite end there. In our next podcast, we'll discuss what happened to John Brown after he was captured at Harper's Ferry and what the legacy was that he left for the United States of America. My name is Dr. Rick Gardner from Columbus State University. This has been another Muskogee County School District podcast, John Brown and Harper's Ferry.